There's a piece of flint and a rusted strip of steel that my grandfather Amos put in my hands when I was 8 years old up in the high country of northwest Montana. He told me that little piece of rock and steel was worth more than anything on a store shelf, and an old Métis trapper named Pete Dumont later taught me the deeper skills that keep a man alive, long after his gear breaks down. I've spent more than 50 years living in this backcountry since then. 19 of those winters completely alone, and I've guided better than 400 people through ground that could have killed them. I'm Cole Hartwell, and that's why I'm the one telling you this. There's 25 of these skills in what's coming. Fire to shelter, to food, to hides, to trapping, to finding your way home with nothing but the sky overhead. Enough talking, and let's start with number 1. Skill 1. Making char cloth and a tinder nest. You take a scrap of plain cotton cloth, an old shirt, whatever's cotton and not synthetic, and you seal it into a tin with one small hole poked in the lid. Set that tin near the coals, not in the flame. Let it cook. The smoke coming out that hole turns from white to a thin blue, and that's your signal to pull it and let it seal itself airtight as it cools. What's left inside isn't burned. It's charred, and it'll catch a spark and hold an ember the way dry grass never could. Build a nest of the driest, finest material you can find. Cattail fluff, shredded bark, dead grass rubbed soft between your palms. And you're ready for the next step. Skill 2. Striking flint and steel. This is the part everybody pictures wrong. You don't strike the edge of that steel against the rock. You strike the spine, the dull back of the blade, and you pull it downward across a sharp edge of flint in one slicing motion. That shaves off tiny white-hot curls of steel, and one of those curls needs to land square in your char cloth. Catch it, fold the cloth closed around it, blow gentle, and you've got fire going before you'd even find the button on a butane lighter. Skill 3. Building a fire in snow and wet ground. This one trips up people who've only ever started a fire on dry gravel. You lay down a platform of green logs first, side by side, before you ever set tinder on top of anything. Skip that step and your fire melts straight down into the snow underneath it, drowns itself in its own runoff, and you're back to nothing in 20 minutes. Lay the platform, build slow, and give it the 20 to 30 minutes it needs before you expect any real heat back. That patience isn't optional out there. A Faro rod fire kit off a store shelf runs you $30 to $60, and it wears down to nothing after enough strikes. The flint sitting in a creek bed and the steel strip in my pocket haven't cost me a dime since the day Amos handed them over, and they don't wear out any faster than I do. Once you can make fire in the worst conditions the mountains can throw at you, the next problem shows up fast, and it's keeping that heat once you've got it instead of losing it the second you lie down to sleep. Skill 4. Building a snow shelter that won't kill you. A snow shelter will keep you alive through a night that would kill you out in the open, but only if you build it right. Pack the walls down thick, 8 inches or better, because loose snow insulates and packed snow just sits there cold. Shape the roof into a dome so it sheds weight evenly instead of caving in on you at 3 in the morning. Poke a ventilation hole near the top before you ever climb inside, because a sealed snow shelter traps the carbon dioxide you breathe out. And that's a way to fall asleep and never wake up. Check that hole through the night, because fresh snow will seal it shut without you ever noticing. Skill 5. Reading the land for a campsite. Picking the ground you build on matters just as much as the building itself. Stay off avalanche paths. They show themselves as a lane of young trees or a band of aspen cut clean through older timber. Evidence of a slide that's already happened once and will happen again. Camp above the low spots where cold air pools overnight, not down in them. And listen for a sound the old-timers called the WHUME, a deep, hollow settling underfoot that means the snowpack has a weak layer and wants to move. Skill 6. Laying a bough bed. Before you lay anything else down underneath you, lay a bough bed. Shingle pine or spruce boughs the way you'd shingle a roof, overlapping each layer, and pile it on thick. 10 inches loose is about right, because it packs down to 5 or 6 inches once your weight settles into it. The ground under a fire will pull the heat right out of your back faster than the fire can put it in. A bed of boughs is the only thing standing between you and that. Skill 7. Sleeping warm with no bag. This comes down to 3 tricks Pete Dumont drilled into me. Heat rocks by the fire and tuck them against your core. Not your feet, because your body moves warm blood from the core outward. You want to feed that furnace, not chase cold toes. Build a reflector wall of logs or stack snow behind your fire. Angled toward where you're lying, it'll throw close to double the radiant heat back at you instead of wasting it into the dark. And curl your body instead of stretching it out, because less of you exposed to open air means less heat bleeding off into the night. It was never the cold itself that killed a man in any of those 4 situations. It was losing his own body heat because he didn't know the rules for holding on to it. I had a young man with me once, Tyler Brandt, 19 years old, strong as a colt. A whiteout rolled in, and he panicked and ran instead of sitting still. The cold had him in under an hour. Less than a mile from a warm camp, that was heat going, nothing else. That same rule shows up again later in this list in the hide section, where one particular skill answers that problem better than anything else in this video. And I'm not naming it yet. Once fire and shelter are both handled, the next question every mountain man had to solve was how to carry enough calories on his own back to keep doing this kind of work for months at a stretch. No truck, no store, no resupply coming. Skill 8. Making pemmican. This is the single most efficient food a man can carry, pound for pound. And it isn't close. You dry meat down hard, pound it into a coarse powder between 2 stones, and work it together with rendered fat in close to equal parts by weight, kneading it until the fat's worked all the way through. Instead of sitting in clumps, what comes out the other side packs somewhere around 3,500 to 4,000 calories in every single pound, and it keeps for years without spoiling. No refrigeration, no packaging, nothing but the fat itself sealing out the air. The Hudson's Bay Company issued its voyageurs up to a full pound of pemmican a day because paddling and portaging that kind of country burns close to 5,000 calories, and nothing else they could carry came close to keeping up with that. Traders reckoned it worth about 4 times its weight in plain meat. Once you understand what a pound of it does for a working man, that math stops sounding like an exaggeration. Skill 9. Rendering fat into tallow. Tallow is what makes pemmican possible to begin with, and rendering it right takes patience more than skill. You take the kidney fat and the leaf fat, the cleanest fat on the animal, and melt it down low and slow, skimming the foam off the top as it rises. Strain it through cloth until it runs clear, and store it one dry because tallow that picks up even a trace of moisture turns rancid inside weeks instead of lasting years. Skill 10. Smoking and drying meat. This is the other half of keeping a winter's worth of protein from rotting on your back. Slice it thin. Hang it over a slow smoke from a green hardwood. Never a resinous softwood like pine, because pine smoke leaves a bitter, tar-heavy taste that ruins the meat. 24 to 48 hours over that smoke, low heat the whole time. And you're drying the meat, not cooking it, pulling the moisture out slow enough that nothing inside it has a chance to spoil. Skill 11. Salt curing and brining. This was more of a base camp job than something you'd do out on a trapline, because salt itself was heavy to carry and valuable enough to trade. A dry pack of salt or a brine running about a pound of salt to the gallon of water would hold meat through a season if you had the barrels and the time to sit still and do it properly. Skill 12. Making rockahominy. This is the one most people have never even heard the name of. Parched corn, ground down fine, what folks further west called pinole. No cooking required on the trail, light enough that you'd hardly notice the weight. And it digests slow instead of spiking and crashing the way a candy bar would, which meant a man could work a full day on a handful of it and not run out of steam by noon. Skill 13. Using the whole animal. Nothing on the animal went to waste. Not the tail, not the marrow, not even the stomach, which got used as a cooking vessel more than once. Sinew for sewing, hide for clothing and shelter. Every scrap accounted for, because every single ounce carried into that country had to be earned first, on foot, with your own back. Waste a hind quarter of meat because you didn't have a way to preserve it, and you'd earned that same weight in nothing, which is why every one of these preservation skills mattered as much as the hunt itself. A single pouch of freeze-dried trail meal runs $8 to $15 today, and what's inside amounts to empty calories that won't taste like much of anything 6 months from now. Pemmican and rocahominy cost next to nothing to make, and kept for years, not months. I guided a fellow once named Doug Pruitt, who showed up with every piece of food gear you could name and almost no idea how to use any of it when it mattered. Pete Dumont could keep himself alive a week on nothing. The difference wasn't the pack, it was the knowledge inside the man carrying it. Shelter keeps you alive for one hard night. Food security like this is what let a man stay out for an entire season instead of a long weekend. That gap right there is the real difference between a mountain man and somebody with a fancy pack. None of that fat, none of that dried meat is worth carrying if you've got no way to wear it, wrap it, or survive the weather while you're hauling it. That's exactly where the hide work comes in. Skill 14. Brain tanning a hide. This is the one. Right back at the start of this list, I told you there was a skill the old hands wouldn't show a greenhorn until he'd earned it. This is it. The brain of that same animal is loaded with fine oils and worked into a hide's fibers. Those oils condition the leather clear down to the root, soft enough to fold like cloth. What separates a man who can do it from a man who ruins the hide trying comes down to one thing: motion. That softness only happens if you keep the hide moving the entire time it dries. Stretch it, cable it, stake it, bounce it, pull it side to side, and then lengthwise, over and over, for 2 to 3 full cycles across 2 to 3 days. Let that same brain-soaked hide sit still even for an afternoon, and the skin's own natural glues set up hard. You're left holding stiff rawhide instead of soft buckskin. Same hide, same brain treatment, ruined by nothing but stillness. Nobody talks about the actual hard part of this skill. It isn't the recipe. It's the discipline of staying with a hide for 2 straight days when every muscle in your arms wants to quit before it's finished. Pete Dumont wouldn't hand that job to a man until he trusted him not to walk away from a hide halfway through, because walking away is the only way to fail it. He'd watch a greenhorn's hands on a smaller pelt first, a fox or a coyote, before he'd ever trust him with a deer or an elk hide that meant real clothing for real winter. That's the whole reason this one got kept back from anybody who hadn't already proven he could finish what he started. Skill 15. Smoking the finished buckskin. Take a breath, because everything from here moves slower and steadier than brain tanning did. Once a hide's tanned, you smoke it, and that step locks the softness in for good, so the hide can get soaked through in a rainstorm and dry soft again, instead of turning stiff on you the way it would raw. Sage smoke leaves the hide a pale yellow. Douglas fir turns it a deeper brown. And either way, it's the smoke that lets buckskin actually survive being worn in wet country. Skill 16. Skinning and fleshing. Before any of that tanning happens, the hide has to be skinned and fleshed clean. Every trace of fat and membrane scraped off the inside, because any fat left behind will rot that hide from the inside out, no matter how well you tan the outside of it later. That fleshing work is easy to rush, and rushing it is how a man loses a hide he already put a full day of skinning into. Skill 17. Stretching pelts on willow hoops. Pelts you're keeping whole get stretched on a green willow hoop, laced up with strips of rawhide pulled to even tension all the way around. That even tension is what stops the hide from shrinking crooked or creasing into weak spots as it dries over 2 to 4 days. Skill 18. Sewing with awl and sinew. Sewing that finished hide takes an awl and sinew instead of thread. Sinew does something no plant fiber or synthetic cord will do. It swells and tightens when it gets wet. The exact opposite of everything else you could sew with. That's why a sinew-sewn seam out in wet country doesn't loosen up and fail. It gets tighter and stronger the more it's rained on. Skill 19. Making moccasins. Moccasins are where all of it comes together. Cut from a single piece of brain-tanned hide, wrapped as both sole and upper, moose or caribou hide standing up best to timber and brush, a rawhide sole laced on for rocky or cactus ground, dry grass packed inside for insulation against the cold. One pair, made right, will outlast anything you could buy, and it'll shape itself to your own foot in a way no boot off a shelf ever will. A technical rain shell off a store rack runs $200 to $400 today, and it'll start failing at the seams inside a single hard season. Brain-tanned buckskin cost a man nothing but his own time and his own labor, and it never depreciated the way that jacket will. Food keeps a man alive for a season. A hide, done right the way Pete taught me, is a piece of equipment that outlasts the animal it came from. And that's a different kind of stake than just staying alive. That's building something with your own 2 hands that's going to last. Every one of those hides had to come from somewhere, and getting them meant going out after beaver, which meant trapping. And trapping meant carrying the weapons that made all of it possible in the first place. Skill 20. Trapping beaver in underwater sets. This starts with staying scent-free and coming in from upstream. So nothing you're carrying drifts down into water the beaver's already suspicious of. Set the trap right on the beaver's own travel path, 4 to 6 inches of water, with a chain long enough to let the beaver pull straight out into deep water once it's caught. That deep water is what finishes the job fast and keeps the pelt from getting torn up in a fight it doesn't need to have. Skill 21. Harvesting and using castoreum. Castoreum is what turns a good set into a sure one. That's the oily reddish secretion beavers produce themselves out of the castor sacs near the base of the tail. Beavers use it to mark territory the same way a dog marks a fence line. Trappers learn to squeeze it out of a harvested beaver and smear it on a stick set above the trap. And the next beaver that catches the scent comes in to investigate territory it thinks belongs to a rival. Curious enough to swim in close and check the trapline itself, castoreum was worth enough on its own that it got bottled up and shipped clear to Europe for the perfume trade. A whole second market riding alongside the fur trade itself. Around 3,000 men worked that peak beaver trade through the 1820s and 1830s, and every one of them depended on a trick this simple to keep bringing pelts in. Skill 22. Shooting and reloading a flintlock. Shooting a flintlock right means running the same sequence every single time without skipping a beat. Measured powder down the barrel first, a lubricated patch wrapped around the ball to seat it snug against that charge, pushed home firm, but never rammed hard enough to scatter the powder underneath it. Then the pan gets primed with fine powder before you bring it up to full cock. CONCS2 is what keeps you alive here. The same layout in your possibles bag every time, because overcharging that powder is a documented way to burst a barrel in your own hands. And a burst barrel doesn't give you a second chance to learn from it. Skill 23. Casting your own ammunition. This means melting lead down over a low fire and pouring it carefully into a mold, then trimming the sprue once it's cooled enough to handle. The handles on that mold get wrapped tight in buckskin. And that's not decoration. That hide insulates the heat pouring off molten lead without scorching or charring the way rope or plain cloth would. so your hands stay steady on a job where an unsteady hand gets you burned. I've walked into more than 30 search efforts over the years looking for people who got this kind of thing wrong, whether it was a trap, a rifle, or just bad judgment on a slope they shouldn't have been on. 11 of those searches, I brought the person out alive. 2 of them, I didn't. A flintlock doesn't forgive a rushed load, and a beaver set doesn't forgive a careless hand. I'm not guessing at any of that. I paid for this. Every bit of that gear and meat on the ground means nothing if a man can't find his way back to camp with it. That's the last skill set every mountain man needed, the one that's been swapped out today for a device that runs on nothing but a battery. Skill 24. Navigating with no map. Finding your way with no map starts before you ever get lost. And it starts with looking backward. Every so often on the way out, you turn around and look at the trail behind you, because the way back is going to look completely different heading the opposite direction. The country you memorized facing forward won't be there waiting for you if you never checked it the other way. Past that, you read the sun's position through the day. You follow water downhill, because drainages lead to bigger water, and bigger water leads toward people. And at night, you find the Big Dipper and follow its 2 pointer stars straight to Polaris, which hasn't moved on a man yet. Skill 25. Snowshoe and hard country travel. Snowshoes solve a different problem, which is that deep snow will drain your calories faster than almost anything else out here if you're sinking into it with every step. Spreading your weight out over a wider surface keeps you up on top of the snow, instead of fighting through it, stride after stride. Crossing a frozen river takes that same kind of care, reading the ice itself, its color, its thickness, before you trust your weight to it. And underneath every one of those sits a single rule that runs under all 25 skills in this list. Move slow enough that you don't sweat. Sweat-soaked clothing pulls heat off your body faster than standing still in dry clothes in that same cold ever would. And that's the real killer, hiding behind almost every mistake I've seen out here. A GPS unit runs $200 to $500, and it quits the second the battery dies or the screen cracks against a rock. The skies never once failed to show up, and neither has the water. 25 skills. Pemmican needs tallow rendered right. Tallow needs a fire that holds steady long enough to render it. That fire needs char cloth, made the right way, in advance, before you're standing in the snow needing it. None of these were ever separate tricks. They're one system, built so that knowledge, once you actually have it, weighs nothing and never breaks down on you, the way a piece of gear eventually will. If you want the next piece of that system, I'm covering lye soap made from wood ash and tallow, braiding your own rawhide rope, and reading weather straight off the clouds and the animals around you. But don't wait on any of that. This weekend, get a tin, a scrap of cotton, and a nail. Sit by a fire for 20 minutes and make your first batch of char cloth. That's the whole system, starting with one skill you can hold in your hand by Sunday. Boring is what surviving actually looks like. If you want more of this, subscribe and follow along. And if you've got a skill from this list you've already tried, or one you want me to go deeper on, leave it in the comments. I read 'em.